Mick Rooney, investigative journalist and author. You're very welcome to Radio Espial for episode 46. As you can see already, we're dealing with another deep dive analysis case. This is of Patricia Furlong from 1982 in Ireland. Ciaran will be joining us soon for our deep dive analysis. Firstly, again, as always, thank you for the recent subscribers. You can find us at www.radioespial.com. We're on some social media channels. Instagram, yeah, we're on it, but we don't really heavily use it. It just doesn't suit our platform and the way we do things. Certainly Facebook and Twitter, or X as they now call it. Let's get on with it. Our case summary. Patricia Furlong, aged 21, from Dundrum, Dublin, spent the night of Friday, July 23rd, 1982 with friends at her local pub, the Nine Arches. Just before midnight, some of the group of friends decided to head to the late night Fraughan Festival held at Johnnie Fox's pub, Glencullen, in the Dublin Mountains. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Well, being Irish, I should do. Just quick background. Fraughan, I think it's to do with it's a berry, and it's to do with this time of year, sort of late spring, and harvesting and gathering the berry. In the early hours of the morning, she was witnessed leaving the venue to go on a walk with a man described as dressed in an all-white suit. Patricia never returned to her friends at the venue. Around 8 a.m. on Saturday, July 24th, the following day, two teenage girls out for a morning walk discovered Patricia's dishevelled body lying in a field. She was dead following a brutal strangulation with her own upper clothing. Within weeks, a man emerged as a prime suspect in the case, but it would be many years before he was finally charged with the murder of Patricia Furlong. Nothing proved straightforward in this case, a case 42 years later that still remains unresolved. It will be a lesson to police, families and the general public that the outcome of a case can never be taken for granted. Our case background and a little bit more about Patricia. Patricia Furlong was, by all accounts, an innocent, happy-go-lucky young woman who enjoyed disco dancing and roller skating. She was described by her family as friendly, with an endearing innocence, and still had something of a childishness about her. She was born in 1961 to Charles and Eileen Furlong in Dundrum, Dublin, and was the second youngest of six siblings: John, Angela, Alice, Pauline, Patricia herself and David. They all lived in a small 2-bedroom house at Mulvey Park. It was a classic and typical Irish family growing up, sometimes as the family expands with 3 or 4 to a bed at night. Like the rest of her sisters and brothers, she soon found work after leaving school, working as a shop assistant at the local and well-known Hafner's Butchers. She was liked by friends and neighbours, and very recognisable with her long shoulder-length hair and sparkling eyes and smile. Her older sisters Angela and Pauline also looked out for their younger sister. Her main social outlets were a group of friends, Dublin discos and roller skating, particularly in the city centre and nearby Dunleary. The family local pub, the Nine Arches, the regular local haunt where she was equally happy to mix with her young friends and the older neighbours she grew up with. Let's move on to our timeline, and we'll go to Ciaran for his early thoughts on this case, and then we'll really get into the deep dive of the timeline. Just a warning, there are details in this timeline which are not pleasant. It is what it is. We're dealing with a murder case. Okay, let's go to Ciaran. Okay, Ciaran McConnell joins us from Irish Cold Cases, Ireland's Vanishing Triangle. You're very welcome, Ciaran, once again for another deep dive analysis case.
Yeah, thanks again, Mick, for having us back. The Patricia Furlong case, it's actually, would this be the oldest case we've done? I think you're going back 42 years. Anyway.
Outside of features that I've done on Radio Spoil, yes, I think this is possibly the oldest deep dive analysis that we've actually done.
Okay, because it's not so well known these days, but back in the day it would have been quite a prominent case.
I would imagine, I would imagine with the nature of the suspect involved, it would have been quite a prominent case talked about over a number of years.
Well, that's it. It was quite prolonged, the whole thing, yeah.
And obviously it would have been the kind of around the start of our sort of vanishing triangle kind of, theme of, women found in the Dublin Mountains. That would have been, although not connected necessarily with that, that would have been the first case sort of that ilk, should we say.
Yeah, well, it would have probably brought the Dublin Mountains into, like, I suppose, a darker sort of view for people. Very much so, I think, yeah. Another young person again, like very young again, I think.
I think she was just 21. Although I do know some articles list her as 20, some articles list her as 21. I'm never certain at what actual age she specifically was, because it's one thing I haven't been able to ascertain it, and generally most of these cases I can't ascertain a date of birth, but I wasn't able to.
It just happens in the odd case, like for instance the Deirdre Jacob case, the media's always reporting her as 19 and 18.
Yeah, and we had it with Annie McCarrick as well, didn't we? People had her birthday out by and numerous well-established had her birthday out by a week, 10 days.
Yeah, and it's just a very simple thing to get right. Like.
Yeah. All right, let's get going. So we've gone through the case summary and the case background. I showed you there the database file. Let's pick up on our timeline, and when we get through a little bit of this, we'll go back to Ciaran then for his initial thoughts on it. Well, we're just going to start out on the day of, rather the day that led up to Patricia's disappearance. So we're at Friday, July the 23rd, 1982. Now, Patricia attended work at Hafner's Butchers in Dundrum as normal. She was gleefully looking forward to meeting friends and her Friday night out. There were weekend plans to be made, and it is worth noting that in 1982, the Furlong family did not have a house telephone in Mulvey Park where they lived. So around 6 p.m, Patricia left work and headed straight to the local Nine Arches pub for a quick drink and to make plans for the evening. When she got home to her home in Mulvey Park, she had something to eat and then headed off for a bath and to get ready for her night out. Dressed in a white blouse and jacket, blue skirt and white heels, she left the house around 8:20 p.m. Briefly, we know this subsequently, she stopped on the street to have a quick rope skip with two young neighbourhood girls. She arrived to meet several friends at the 9 Acres pub around 8:30 p.m. Sorry, 9 Arches pub. I keep saying acres instead of arches. 10:30 p.m. So the evening is well developed at this stage, and after a few drinks, around this time, 10:30, the gathered young friends, their both male and female group, began to chat and discuss how they might extend their night out, and later when the 9 Arches closed. When the Fraughan Festival in Glencullen was suggested as a possibility, it was agreed that that was the place to go. Among the group was Dennis Glenn. While he didn't want to go, he said he would be happy to drive them up to Glencullen and also collect them later when the festival night ended around 2 a.m. Just for people who are not familiar, particularly at this time in 1982. Ciaran, you'll confirm this as well. Glencullen is kind of on the foot not quite in the mountains, but it's on the foot of the mountains, going up the mountainside, and it's not certainly back then it wouldn't have been the most accessible, easy place to get to as far as bus routes or wherever you were coming from Dublin.
No, you'd have to have a lift, or a taxi would be a fortune back then.
Yeah, reasonably. A taxi was probably certainly late hours, you know, after 6-7 p.m. A taxi was probably the only realistic way you get up there. I think depending on if you lived a little bit closer to the foothills, certain areas of South Dublin, you might get a bus kind of closer, but you still would find yourself having a hell of a trek to get up here.
Although if you're 21, you probably wouldn't have such concerns. Like, she seems to be very carefree, in a good way. You know, like some of the other cases we covered, even with young people, they seem to have, like, you know, a lot of worries and stress in their lives and this type of stuff. But like Patricia Furlong seemed to be living like
as described, very, very happy-go-lucky kind of attitude.
I would say one thing. I don't know if you read this before, Mick. Remember her family were saying that how well dressed she was that night, because apparently for years before that she used to just wear these type of, I don't know, trousers, flares or something, and it was one of the first times.
I think it was these. I think the description was she often wore these black, as they say, geez, you know, you're poured into them trousers. They were tight, which were very common at the time. Sort of tight skin, sort of leathery style trousers. Yeah,
it was a surprise to her family that she was wearing a dress that night.
Yeah,
I thought about it. I don't know if it means anything, because it didn't seem like she had any specific plans to go to anywhere or anything like this. So
well, I think that's something worth coming. Was there, and it's something I sort of ponder when we get to the conclusion, was there something different? Was there something more at the back of our mind going on? Plan wise, and we'll touch on this one when I come to my conclusions, but definitely remind me about that. Just for anybody looking at that image, that's just Johnnie Fox's pub, where this festival was going on. So we're now up to 12:30 a.m. Saturday, so we're into the early hours of the morning, beyond the Friday, into the early hours of Saturday, July 24th, 1982. What is known is that Patricia and a few of her friends arrived around midnight and entered one of the 3 summer beer tents set up on the outside grounds. I think they were behind Johnnie Fox's pub. Now around 1:30 a.m, Paul Regan was just a 14-year-old schoolboy at the time. Critically, he was present at Johnnie Fox's that night. Not only that, he lived a short distance from the Furlongs in Mulvey Park, Dundrum. He knew Patricia and the family well. He saw Patricia outside one of the beer tents and walked over to engage her in a chat. But he quickly realised that Patricia was actually in the company of a man dressed all in white, describing him with black hair as looking like a Shakin' Stevens type of the era. The couple were kissing and cuddling as he observed, and the couple left together out of the field venue and onto the Glencullen road. That image, I'll try and include this as part of our insert so you can see it more clearly. Where I'm showing you,
it would have been pitch black as well, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, there was the, I mean, this place outside of the immediate area of the pub, the roads wouldn't been well lit. There isn't a huge amount of buildings around. This isn't a built-up area. This is, as I say, literally on the foothills of the mountain. In that picture, way back in the distance. In fact, I'm just thinking now, this is a modern picture. In fact, way back then, the M50 in the background didn't even exist. No. That didn't. I don't think that opened until the late 80s. I think maybe mid 80s. I think when it, so that wasn't even there. It would have been just what the proverbial old Tallaght bypass road. So young Paul Regan had no clue that his innocent walk over for a chat with Patricia would form a critical murder case eyewitness statement in Dublin Central Criminal Court many years later. But his statement would not be the only critical statement, eventually. Now at 8 a.m. on July the 24th, okay, so we're into the breakfast time, the following day, two teenage girls are out walking through the Dublin Mountains just past Johnnie Fox's in Glencullen. As they approach a field known locally as Corbett's Field, just off the Glencullen Road, they see a young woman lying down on her back in the field. Familiar with the festival revelry in the area the night before, they think the girl might just be a little bit worse for wear and sleeping, but they're horrified when they get closer. They both run and alert a local farmer, and pretty soon Gardaí, that the Irish police, arrive at the scene. Now, noon Saturday the 24th, State Pathologist Dr. Declan Gilsinen arrives to assess a deeply disturbing and grim scene. A young woman is prone on her back. Her upper clothing has been wrenched up and used to strangle her. It has been used as a tight ligature around her neck. She was still wearing a ring with a green gemstone. Some of her personal belongings from her handbag are scattered around the area. More items are found dumped under a hedge a little bit further away in the field. Items are catalogued in situ and then gathered up later. The young woman's body is removed and taken to Loughlinstown Hospital for further examination and identity. The media, presses and radio broadcast networks begin to roll that a young woman has been found dead in Glencullen that morning. Now, we're into the early afternoon. I found this really tragic and troubling and disturbing, the manner, but I guess this sometimes is the way things happen. Patricia Furlong's family, they're furious. Parents Charles and Eileen and her sisters and brothers cannot understand where Patricia is and why she hasn't told them she stayed out with a friend overnight. That's all they can think. Patricia's siblings are bracing themselves for the right going over she's going to get from her mum and dad when she finally arrives home with an excuse.
That's what everybody would think, isn't
it? Yeah, it's perfectly natural. They are in and out of the house and movie park Dundrum, always watching for Patricia, smiling apologetically for her absence and the scolding she's about to get. But there's no Patricia. The Furlongs are completely unaware of the earlier news on radio and now appearing in the first newspaper editions of the day. Neighbours are gathering on movie park in small groups. Anger and frustration turns to horror and anxiety. A Garda car, followed by an unmarked detective car, pulls up outside the Furlong home. Dr. Gilsinen and two detectives have travelled directly from the murder scene in Glencullen. They already know the likely identity of the one woman dead in Corbett's Field, and that's why they've arrived at a house in Dundrum. Family members are taken to Stepaside Garda station, and it will be the husband of Angela, Patricia's sister, who makes the grim identification in Loughlinstown Hospital an hour later. And it is Patricia, and she isn't coming home to smile again. Ciaran, as we just look at that picture of the two sisters at the funeral, quite some days later.
Strange set
early
of
circumstances,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
With the neighbours gathering on the street, and then.
Yeah, well, as I said, the movie family didn't have a house phone, as many people at that stage wouldn't have had. And
there were just reporters up at the scene, so
they stated, the girls in the family stated that it just happened that they weren't, I mean, at that stage, RTE TV you would have had, on a Saturday morning, but it wasn't news based, on TV at that hour of the day.
No,
there was kids programs, and they weren't listening to the radio, so people still heavily relied on newspapers for their news. Their first time hearing about news was, and then it was only later in the evening when the family sat down to watch TV, and the TV news, they'd already read some of that news in the newspaper, the afternoon newspapers.
That's when the news came to you.
Yeah.
You didn't know what was going on before. Yeah, it takes you back to the time, really. Yeah.
And I think some people perhaps a little bit younger than us, mightn't grasp, that was very much the case, that things, that's the way things happened, and news got around in locales about the serious circumstances of cases, and then the big reads of the Sunday newspaper. That's really the way it happened, and the evening news was kind of a high point of a family's evening. Everybody sat down and you'd be told to shut up, the news is on, and that's the way it happened.
Yeah, that was that's what you found out about stuff.
I
suppose it's a good thing for mobile phones, or a plus point for mobile phones, that people don't necessarily have to go through that before. Like, usually the victim's family find out first now.
Yeah, more often. Okay, so this is a slight aside. The suspect and his fiancée. Vincent Connell was born to an Irish mother in London in March 1951. As an only child, Vincent was well educated and articulate. He had did an RSA course in spoken English studies, and was sort of known as to be quite a strong English debating figure in his college days. He dabbled in the music scene in both London and Dublin, but his focus was always as a DJ and radio broadcasting. Connell moved to Ireland with his mother at the age of 19 in 1970. So he was born in 51, moved at the age of 19 in 1970, and they both resided, him and his mother, on Nina Road. I think they were estranged from the father, in Ternier, Dublin. He had many grand aspirations, including joining the Garda Síochána, but ultimately by 1977 he'd moved back to Liverpool in the UK and joined the Merseyside police force. Charming, and a man who could convince and influence anyone he met, Connell would struggle to hold many of his various roles and personas in life for far too long. He was requested to leave the Merseyside police force less than a year into his role, and returned to Ireland by 1978 due to allegations and rumours of an assault on a colleague. It was the first indicator on record that Connell had a short temper and violent and abusive undercurrent buried in his personality. He did ultimately join the Irish forces on his return to Ireland, but this time as a prison officer. This timeline is about the brutal murder of Patricia Long, so I'm not going to spend countless words detailing every illegal act of abuse Connell carried out on many women he met. I'll have a summary of that a little bit later.
This guy would have a record like the length of his arm, right?
Oh, yeah. This guy was well, even at this stage of, early 20s, was well known to police forces both in the UK and Ireland. And the women he lived with, one of the women he eventually married, over a 20-year period leading up to the time of Patricia Furlong's murder and thereafter. So it's suffice to say that almost every woman who came into Vincent Connell's life suffered physical abuse at the hands of a brutal control freak, and he was charged with some of these crimes: arson, assault and attempted murder. Often his girlfriends and their families were terrified of him and refused to press charges. A chronology of Vincent Connell's abuse and life would consume an entire Radio Espial episode or more. When prudent and necessary, I will mention some of those incidences and the women involved in the UK, Ireland, and his time spent in South Africa. I think he also spent some time in Namibia, where appropriate in relation to the case of Patricia Furlong. Nothing ended well wherever Vincent Connell was present. So back to our timeline. I'm going to skip back to a different perspective of that night, and it concerns Vincent Connell. I'm going to skip back to Friday the 23rd again, 1982, but this time we're going to look at it from Connell's perspective. Vincent Connell and his then girlfriend and fiancée of 6 months, I think he'd met her in the January, Mary Creedon, head out for a few drinks at Lamb Doyle's in Sandyford. They then head on to the Fraughan Festival in Glencullen. The relationship is following the same pattern as many of Connell's past girlfriends on a litany of abuse and infidelities. But Mary Creedon is right where Connell wants her, under his charm and control. She will simply be a ticket to his later claimed alibi. Initially, Miss Creedon would state that Connell, having been booted from his prison officer's job for fraternising with prisoners, was now set on a new chance of getting back on the radio for a full career, and there were influential people at the festival who could help him achieve that. Connell was something of a name-dropper in casual conversation, and he convinced Mary Creedon that he would use the venue and event to put a proposal to Bobby Gatton, an executive at the time in RTE, and Nella Allen, who also worked in RTE. The latter would state to Gardaí that she wasn't even at the venue, and no such proposal or communication ever took place to her knowledge. These were all bravado and fantasies Connell made up to those close to him, including his fiancée Mary Creedon.
Mick, do you know who he reminds me of? Ian Bailey. You know that guy who was involved?
The Sophie case. Yeah.
Delusional, like.
Yeah.
He's going to meet RTE executives at like 1:30 in the morning on a Saturday night in a pub. Like, and it seems to me that do you reckon he was an addict or something? He seems to be very sporadic, like even back then, like cocaine or something. He strikes me.
It could have been, but I'm trying to think. Back then,
alcohol.
Back then, you know, alcohol. Alcohol primarily seems to be in one of the drivers of his fits and rages.
Quite arrogant, though.
And I would say at that time, I don't think cocaine was as easily available. I think the major hard drug driving things in Dublin then was heroin.
Yeah, I don't think he strikes me as a heroin addict.
He doesn't strike. I think you pretty much give anybody a few weeks of regular heroin use, and you'll pretty much start to see it, and you won't be able to disguise it.
Yeah, I say alcoholism seems to be.
So it does seem to be. Yeah, that does seem to be the main spark. Around 12:30 to 1 a.m. after they arrived. This is Mary Creedon and Vincent Connell at Johnnie Fox's pub. Connell spotted a girl he previously, to use his quote, had a couple of dates with and wanted to chat with her, and he would be back shortly. However, in initial reports to Gardaí, Miss Creedon had stated that Connell was only ever out of her company for a few minutes, and that was just to use the toilet. In reality, she was fearful of Connell and his temper, and disclosing that in fact he had disappeared for more than 40 minutes or more out of her company, and when he did return, he was agitated and aggressive verbally towards her, and they left the venue sometime after 2:30 to 3 a.m. A barman at the venue interviewed did confirm that the event, I think there was also a DJ who confirmed that the event itself finished a short time after 2 a.m. Connell, according to Mary, was still agitated and silent on the drive home. When Mary Creedon and Vincent Connell first heard and discussed the dead girl found in Glencullen the following day, remember Patricia's identity had not been released to the public, it was he who suggested that they go to the police and offer a statement, considering they were in Johnnie Fox's. They intended driving to Stepaside Garda Station, which is what Mary believed was happening, but instead Connell insisted on going to Johnnie Fox's to hear what the locals knew. Ciaran?
He doesn't strike me as the type of guy who would regularly help the Gardaí, would he? Just of his own accord?
No.
It's very quick to be heading down for a statement the next day if you're just there amongst 1,000 people. Did they say was that?
1,000 people, and we would have limited details other than a girl has been found dead. In the area of Johnnie Fox. How does he know some of these details?
The hasn't been arrested.
Yeah, so you're kind of thinking, is this those classic? And you'd know more of this in the history of criminology. Yeah, is this the classic case of the killer returning to the scene of the crime because their own obsessions and fascination with what they've done It's just overcome them, and they have to know who knows what and how much is known about him and any incriminating things that might develop.
And it's the arrogance then that gets him like noticed, because he thinks that he's smarter than everybody, so nobody will cop what he's doing. Like he's as obvious when he's as subtle as a brush or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, dreadful.
Okay, so while they give verbal statements at Stepaside Garda Station, both refused to provide signed and written statements on Connell's instructions to Mary.
That's unusual for a voluntary statement,
yeah.
Isn't it?
Why the hell would you go to the trouble of offering yourself to provide a statement and give information, turn up at a Garda station, offer to give a statement, and then when the statement is either verbally recorded or it's handwritten down by a Garda, and then you say, okay, that's grand, now will you just read over that and then just sign it? Oh no, we're not signing that. Oh, we didn't think there was this much of it. It just doesn't hold together. It sounds completely.
It's a man who worked in the Merseyside Police Force anyway. Well.
And the prison office service over here.
Bizarre.
Okay, so they refused to sign the statements, and so while alarm bells rose with the initial investigators, and I bet they did, ultimately in 1982, Mary Creedon's alibi for O'Connell was simply accepted and would not be further examined and tested for quite some time. Instead, detectives switched their focus to single men who had attended the festival that night. Connell and Creedon moved to the UK soon after. Creedon was reluctant initially, but Connell was persuasive, claiming that he had assurances of a broadcasting job over there. With the assistance of our family, this is later, months later, Mary Creedon would eventually flee Connell and return to Ireland. Connell would pursue his broadcasting attempts in the UK and later South Africa and Namibia, with continued allegations of drunkenness, violence, and his past of 20 years that would finally catch up with him on his return to Ireland. We're on to August 1982. Dr. Bartley Sheehan declares that Patricia Furlong died of asphyxia due to strangulation with the use of her own upper clothing. Now, between 1982 and 1986, over weeks, months and years, Garda would try and track down more than 1,000 people who attended the Fraughan Festival in Glencullen in July 82. Initially, investigating Garda believed they were after a man dressed all in white with a dark-haired quiff. This is the so-called Shakin' Stevens persona looking guy, but concentrated their efforts to open files on every single man who attended the festival. This proved a poor decision, which wasted many years, and only on several case reviews by senior Gardaí teams did Vincent Connell begin to come back into focus as a prime suspect. This, in conjunction with Connell's behaviour and charges abroad at home when he returned to Ireland. Ciaran, will I continue, or do you want to come in on that in there?
No, not really much. I'll see if I note something down. Yeah, just the actual crime itself. It seems like not necessarily a crime of opportunity, but it's not planned either, right? That way, like, it's very kind of sporadic, and he used her own clothing to kill her, like, so.
Yeah, if you're gonna kill somebody, you don't turn up in a white suit.
No, there's another one, right?
Looking like John Travolta.
Exactly, at a festival with 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Even he's not that arrogant, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I suppose it's a question of, are you more dumb than arrogant? Or, what's the strongest instinct? Yeah. So 1987, Garda Intelligence alerted the investigation team that Connell was on a short visit from South Africa back to Ireland to visit his mother in Terranure. Connell was hauled in for more questioning, but he stuck to his original alibi, provided by Mary Creedon, that he never knew or met Patricia Furlong. To his knowledge, he was never out of the company of his then girlfriend Mary Creedon for more than a few minutes on July 23rd into the early hours of the morning of 24th, 1982.
What about his broadcasting meeting with the RTE executives? That must have been very quick.
Yeah, it must have been probably in the toilet, yeah. And he had absolutely nothing to do with Patricia's murder. It's interesting. I have never heard anything followed up on that, whether the Gardaí did or not. Now, I know they did interview those executives in RTE, and all I can tell you is from the Nella Allen statement is that she said, I wasn't even at the venue, and I have no information about any communication, or any promised jobs, or any meeting about a project regarding Vincent Connell. But slowly, Gardaí were starting to unravel his alibi. They needed one final break, and once again it was Connell who provided the opportunity through his own violence and history, and perhaps, as Ciaran said, his own arrogance. So the evidence mounts. Examination of Patricia's diary showed a male fingerprint, suggesting her killer may have flicked through it before placing it in one of the piles discarded. A witness said he had seen Miss Furlong sitting on a water tank at the rear of the pub with a man. It appeared they had been sitting there for some time, and an examination of a beer glass left on the tank revealed yet another fingerprint. The identity of the person or persons who left these prints could never be established with the technology and criminal databases at the time. Do you know one thing that struck me about the glass? I don't mean the diary, because that was kind of close to the crime scene. I'm questioning the validity of that information there, which was reported in an independent article over those years. I can't understand how a woman is found at 8 a.m. by two teenage girls, hours and hours and hours after she's been murdered, and yet somehow the Gardaí can retrieve a glass from Johnnie Fox's with a fingerprint on him. Wouldn't those glasses have been washed up with 1,000 people? I thought that this I seriously questioned the validity of that information that was provided.
When I read it, to be honest, it just seemed very out of place and kind of surreal. And just, what does this like? Because actually, I popped up to me a few times when I was reading up on the case, and it's like I don't necessarily. Did the journalist who was reported to like get it wrong, and then they was reported wrong, and
it seems a bit of a mishmash of information, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I can understand the fingerprint possibly picked up on a diary because that was close to the scene and retrieved, or rather I think it was dumped at a hedge.
There wouldn't have been CCTV at the back of the pub.
But a glass with a fingerprint on it, hours the following day retrieved. At a venue with 1,000 people, come on, that doesn't make any sense at all.
No.
Are we to believe that the Gardaí went in and seized every single glass in the entire establishment, cleared them out, and saying we're examining all those glasses for fingerprints, whether they're washed or not washed?
And even then, what's that established?
Yeah.
You left your glass somewhere.
So Vincent Connell's fingerprint is on a glass. Well, he never denied he wasn't at Johnnie Fox's, so I don't understand what relevance this has. Another witness, a young woman who knew Patricia, named one man she had seen in the company of Patricia that night as a man known to Patricia at the time. She also stated that at the previous year's festival in Glencullen, the same young man had tried to strangle her. She named the man and said she had seen him both with Patricia and another young man who was the owner of a red Ford Escort and had also been at the festival. Now again, a bit like the fingerprint on the glass, I'm pretty circumspect about these details being reported in the media. And that statement is simply because we know Connell and his girlfriend travelled to Glencullen in their own vehicle What relevance would there be with another man and his vehicle at the time? They had their own vehicle for transport. We know they left the premises in that vehicle. I'm lost there, Ciaran, unless you can help me.
Yeah. And it says this young man tried to strangle her. Is that the friend or is that Patricia?
I think that's Patricia. I think I see what they're getting at here.
Yeah, so like, unless that's okay, just to read between the lines, like, just to speculate, if that's meant to be Connell, right? Young man, he's not that young, is he? 31 or something, right?
51 to he's 30. He's 31 in 82. So perhaps I'm misreading it wrong from that quote, from that article quote.
Well, maybe they're it's a bit strange. So you're trying to work out also the red Ford Escort.
Are they then referring to the woman friend was the one that was strangled, or is it Patricia?
Yeah, and then the owner of the red Ford Escort, who had also been at the festival, it doesn't necessarily say that he went there in the red Ford Escort, but then it doesn't really have any other relevance to
again,
right?
all these details and that article we're referring to, I'm a bit lost on the entire relevance of any of them.
But Mick, I did read an article in the Independent that was kind of trying to speculate that it wasn't Connell and all this type of stuff. So there might be some things out there in the media where people have like kind of tried to steer it like that it wasn't Connell, like, or whatever. Because the Independent did write one up saying that maybe he helped somebody else.
He was working in liaison with somebody else, or he was covering for somebody else. But why would you go to that? Why would you put yourself?
Didn't make sense.
Why would you come forward as one of the earliest eyewitnesses, literally the following morning, hear about what happened, turn up at Stepaside Garda Station and start offering witness statements and how could you help, when you already know, shit, I'm covering for somebody here. I surely in that statement you would have offered deliberately misleading information to cover up for your friend who you know was involved. So I don't. Again, it's very odd.
No, but it's like there is a few though. You're right. There's a few like in decent enough papers like the Independent and that where there's a few strange articles about this. Like,
yeah,
you know. So forever it means.
3 other witnesses said they had seen Patricia in the company of a young man of slim build and around 6 foot tall, wearing white shoes, jacket and trousers, and we can only assume they're referring to Connell. They all concurred that this man had his hair in a quiff similar to that of the then popular singer Shakin' Stevens. We know 2 of those witnesses were people who had travelled to Johnnie Fox's pub with Patricia, and the other being the 14-year-old neighbour, Paul Regan. I suppose I know what people are thinking. What the hell was a 14-year-old kid doing at Johnnie Fox's at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning?
I'll answer that, Nick.
Ciaran will answer that, and I think I know what the answer is. Go on.
It's Ireland.
It's Ireland. Yep, it's Ireland, and it was the 1980s, and we were all innocent and wonderful people then. And it didn't stop any of us getting a drink at a very early age. It didn't stop any of us walking into a venue, and believe me, this was at a time where you weren't even asked for ID. If you stood higher than the counter, you were old enough.
And that's not necessarily exclusive to the 1980s. That
went on into the 90s,
into the 90s even, yeah.
So in 1989, Vincent Connell moved back to Ireland for good. By now, Mary Creedon had revealed to Gardaí that her first account of the night and early morning of July 23rd, 24th was not entirely accurate. She also revealed a litany of domestic abuse and that Connell had not been in her company that night for a period of more than 40 minutes. But this alone was not enough for the DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, to order a charge of murder on Connell. Once again, Connell briefly held down a late night radio job on Alternative Capital Radio in Dublin, but was let go the following year in what was described as a cost-cutting exercise at the radio station. He had also begun a new relationship with Barbara Rooney, and before you ask, no, she is not related to me, and lived with her in a flat in Fairview. Believe it or not, the name Rooney is actually not uncommon in Ireland.
No, there's a fair few people.
It's plenty of Roonies out there, believe me. On Monday, November the 20th, he assaulted Barbara Rooney and threatened her with a kitchen knife and attempted to strangle her. She managed to free herself, and when Connell fell asleep from drunkenness, she fled to Fairview Garda Station to report the assault. In 1990, at 6 p.m. on May 20th, finally equipped with the go-ahead from the DPP and multiple amassed charges, a Garda team moved in on the Fleet Street bar in D'Olier Street in Dublin and arrested Vincent Connell where he was drinking. A case detective had invited Connell to meet him for a drink and clear up these allegations that Connell had about harassment from the police. He'd been tracked and monitored for months. This time, the DPP presented a charge which would hold Connell as a ruse to getting to the truth of what happened to Patricia Furlong. Vincent Connell was arrested for petrol letterbox arson on the home of Gillian Cain on May the 15th that year, one of his previous girlfriends.
That's such a dangerous crime.
Yeah, and on a family, and there were other people living there as well.
Unbelievable.
For years, the Cain family had lived in fear of Connell's threats to them, following his 3-year relationship with Gillian from 78 to 81. He had recruited a Dublin criminal to go to the home of Gillian Cain's mother, Phyllis, and assault her in that manner. You can see the word there. If I mention this word, we start getting strikes and stuff. With a hot curling iron for a payment of £2,000. He had already attempted to throttle the Cain's family dog to death before being caught in the act by Gillian's mother, Phyllis. And of course, during initial questioning at Tallaght Garda Station, just like Patricia Furlong, he profusely denied ever knowing Gillian Cain, until interviewing detectives, again in a setup, brought Gillian Cain into the room. Connell crumbled and admitted he knew the Cain family and had indeed carried out the arson attacks on their house. Only now, during a 40-year period of questioning, could detectives really move to the real reason they had arrested him, the murder of Patricia Furlong. Finally, Detective Sergeant Jerry Healy and Detective Jerry O'Connell unloaded much of the evidence they had on Connell, including statements by Mary Creedon, Paul Regan, Nella Allen and Barbara Rooney, and many other girlfriends Connell had known and abused. This included the girlfriend he tied up at times and locked in a room. I think she was chained to a radiator at one stage as well, at times, while at work when he lived in the UK. Vincent Connell was broken. Just like every person he had claimed to love in his life, the game was up, and he informed detectives of his version of events on the early hours of July 24th, 1982. And these are his words from his statement. At one stage in the evening, I went to the toilet and met a lady that I knew. We were talking about roller skating, probably because she was a customer of mine at the Top Hat in Dunleary, where I was assistant manager. Actually, I know her name. It was Trish from the Top Hat. She had aspirations to get on my roller disco team. When she would come to the Top Hat ballroom, she would always come over and acknowledge me. She did not come over to roller skate lessons. I'm paraphrasing him. We decided to go for a walk after a few minutes, meaning him and Patricia. She was struggling to get over a gate. I put my arms on her shoulder to support her. And quoting again, then she slapped me in the face. This incensed me and I hit her back. Then I lost my rag and began to choke her with my hands. She began to scream, but I had to stop her. She fell to the ground. Connell then describes how the couple struggled and eventually fell again to the ground. I pulled her clothing up tight around her neck to stop her from shouting. I panicked and tied them around her neck and squeezed around the neck. During the struggle, there was very little struggle. I heard the next day she had died. I did not know she was dead when I left her. She was breathing lightly. When I met Trish, I had no intention of killing her. I did not mean to do it. And referring to the crime scene, at some point during the altercation with Patricia, she dropped her handbag and multiple items fell out. Later, close to her body and also further away in a hedge. There was a little makeup, door keys, perfume and a little diary. I can't recall any money, and there were some women's toiletries. I took the diary and some of the cosmetics away with me. I threw the bag down the field from where Trish was lying. Then I got onto the road and over a nearby wall and walked back towards Johnnie Fox's pub, where I threw the diary and cosmetics into a hedge. I then went back to the beer tent to Mary. We stayed on in the beer tent for a short while after that and went home at 3 a.m. Ciaran.
He's a psychopath, right?
Yeah,
borderline, anyway.
Yeah.
Did you hear that bit where he said, "Oh, there was a struggle"? Actually, there was no struggle.
Yeah. It's like you can almost hear the mind in those words working, thinking ahead every step of the sentence he's going to say.
Terrible character. Like, you'd wonder, like, I know back to the start you were saying she was quite a nice little innocent girl and all that type of stuff, but how she ever got involved with such a man? But I suppose he's probably an absolute manipulator.
Well, a charmer, you know. And when we start to go through the litany of abuse, woman after woman after woman after woman, and I'm not talking 2 or 3 years with a woman. I'm talking month by month, few months, another few months, another few months, another woman. Literally, it was almost like these women. And please, I don't mean it in this manner, but it was almost like he had the charm to have women queuing up for him, one after the other. He always had a girlfriend, right? Yeah. Constantly, yeah. Connell had described the scene in detail, the crime scene in detail. Patricia's body, the scattered items, many of which details at the time were still unknown to the public. He would later contest these statements, claiming they were written for him, and he deliberately signed them V. Connell, knowing this was not his standard signature. However, Gardaí were able to later produce several other formal letters of communication when O'Connell used exactly the same style of signature with them. Connell had a whole catalogue of phone calls and letters of complaint of harassment about the Gardaí across several years. We're going to take a video insert now, and this is May 2022, 1990, and this is literally when the 48-hour period had accumulated and finished, and Vincent Connell was brought to court to appear for the very first time. So let's take a listen to that insert.
Connell was brought to the Dublin District Court from Tallagarda Station, where he had been held for questioning since Sunday evening. He was driven quickly into the yard, where Gardaí covered his head and ushered him into a late sitting of the court before Justice William Hamill. There, the charge of murdering Patricia Furlong of Dundrum at Glencullen on July 24, 1982, was formally put to Connell during a short hearing. Detective Sergeant Jerry O'Carroll, nearest the camera, told the Justice that he arrested Connell at a city centre bar on Sunday evening. He detained him under the Offences Against the State Act on suspicion of committing arson at Dangan Park in Crumlin on the 15th of May 1982. The court then heard that Chief Superintendent John Courtney, seen here on the left, made an order yesterday afternoon extending by a further 24 hours the period for which Connell could be detained for questioning. Detective Inspector Michael Canavan of Crumlin asked that Connell should be remanded in custody for a week, and that was granted. Before Connell left the court to be taken to Mountjoy Prison, the Justice was told he was not working at present and that he wished to apply for legal aid.
October 1991. The trial of Vincent Connell began and lasted over 42 days. He was found guilty of murder on Thursday, December the 19th, after a jury in the Central Criminal Court deliberated for 6 hours and 45 minutes. Justice Richard Johnson imposed the mandatory life sentence. Vincent Connell and his defence would later lodge an appeal against his conviction and sentence on the grounds that he'd been prevented from contacting a solicitor, ill-treated during questioning by Gardaí, and deprived of sleep for 48 hours, and that his admission of strangling Patricia Furlong in a statement were not his own words, but created by several Gardaí detectives who questioned him.
I'd say from the start he's there manipulating that situation, just because he used to be a copper, like, you know.
Yeah, well, people, you know, I suppose like O'Connell, you know, who are very familiar with the laws from Merseyside Police, then as a prison officer, you know, they know how to milk the system and milk, you know, what do I do to create possibilities where this can be challenged later on, no matter what I say or admit to. Again, I'll try and put up some of these inserts so you can pause and have a read of them later. This was just snippets from newspapers of when Connell was arrested and eventually convicted. Now, February to April 1995, so we're 4 years on, nearly 5 years on from the court case. The mother of Patricia Long, Eileen, passes away 5 weeks before the appeal trial began. She would die, never knowing her daughter's killer would be released on appeal. The Court of Criminal Appeal overturns the original verdict, and Vincent Connell is freed from prison. Justice Egan rules that Connell had indeed been interviewed for more than a 4-hour periods of time, which breached Garda guidelines, and that he had not slept during the 48-hour period of detention. Justice Egan rejected the claims of the defence that he was prevented from contacting a solicitor when Gardaí provided proof of phone calls made to a solicitor's office after his arrest. I think it was something to do with the fact that he was allowed to phone his solicitor, but hello, he was phoning his solicitor at an office that wasn't manned on a Sunday, which is why he wasn't getting any callbacks. They also provided job cell logs that Connell had been checked every half hour, and it was he who refused to sleep during those down periods of questioning. However, Vincent Connell's appeal was sustained, to use Justice Egan's words, on very narrow legal grounds. Now, post 95-96, having already served nearly 5 years in prison, Vincent Connell later pleaded guilty to 4 charges of assault causing bodily harm to Gillian Kane, Mary Creedon, Agnes Long and Barbara Rooney, all previous girlfriends. He was given a 12-year sentence, but as Connell had already served 5 years, Justice Budd suspended the remaining 7 years on time served and good behaviour in prison. He battered one, stubbed a cigarette out in the face of another, and tried to strangle 2 of them. On release,
in prison.
Yep, they sure know how to behave themselves in prison. It's a pity they don't do that when they're on the other side.
No. That's because he's in prison full of men.
Yep.
Not really the style
that he can't control. No. On release, Vincent Connell addressed the media. His words: "I pleaded guilty to 4 crimes I did not commit under threat from the state of having to undergo a lengthy trial on further serious charges." 2 counts of attempted murder he's referring to, thank you very much, including arson, which I firmly believe never took place and was a device to arrest me and hold me for 48 hours under the Offences Against the State Act. Well, you got that one right, Connell. None of the incidences took place, and I pleaded guilty to 1 incident at Peaker's Hotel in Dunleary, a place I have never been to in my life. (1998) On the 21st of March, Hampshire police in the UK broke down the door of a house on Eastern Road in Portsmouth. Vincent Connell was found dead. He died alone on March the 11th, according to the coroner's report, following a major heart attack.
Connell, relief of many people.
Many people, many of them we're just about to list here. Connell died at the age of 46, just short, I think, of his 47th birthday. He left a litany of victims behind him. Gillian Kane, a dental nurse, girlfriend and fiancée from 78 to 81, domestic abuse and arson. Phyllis Kane, mother of Gillian, arson. Barbara Wallace, 1980, who had a 3-month relationship with him, domestic abuse. Agnes Long, 81 to 82, domestic abuse, attempted strangulation. Mary Creedon, girlfriend and fiancée, 1982, domestic abuse and attempted strangulation, threats of arson and abuse on her family. Patricia Long, 1982, strangulation and murder. Denise Rain, 1983, attacked with a hammer in South Africa and crippled for life. Threats of abuse and arson on her and her family if she reported it to the police. Felicity Lowe, 85 to 86, who married Connell, domestic abuse to her and her teenage daughter in South Africa. Barbara Rooney, domestic abuse, knife threats and attempted strangulation. Now, sadly, in 2009, Patricia's father, also Charles Furlong, died suddenly at home in Dundrum in December of that year. He was buried in Glencullen Cemetery, close to where his beloved daughter had lost her life.
He must have made a good age, did he? 2009?
He would have, yeah, because Patricia was the second youngest of the of the
Some
6
of her
kids.
siblings are married when she was killed.
Yeah. They just started moving out of the house. 2024. So bringing things up to date on where we are. This case remains open following the conviction, appeal, and release and death of Vincent Connell. Gardaí are hoping that modern DNA technology will prove once and for all that Vincent Connell did kill Patricia Furlong. They continue to probe his links with other cases in Ireland, the UK, and South Africa over a period of 20 years. So on to our conclusions and analysis. We may never know how well Vincent Connell knew Patricia Furlong in 81 to 82 prior to her murder in a field in Glencullen. What is certain is that their paths crossed at discos and roller skating venues. Whether the pair did actually date a couple of times, that was Connell's conversation to Mary Creedon, is now a moot point. They clearly knew and recognised each other that night at Johnnie Fox's pub in July 1982. And through her friend circle, that can be established. There will always be very specific details we'll never know in this case. I go back to that discussion Patricia had with her friends in the Nine Arches on the evening of Friday, July 23rd. And I'm still left wondering who was it within the group who suggested or put forward the idea of going to the Fraughan Festival in Glencullen later that night, and for what reason, when there were plenty of other late night clubs and discos far more accessible to friends from Dundrum. At 10:30 p.m, with disco clubs opening at 11 p.m, buses were still running to the city centre in Dublin, offering a myriad of venues, and other venues close by in Rathfarnham and Tallaght would have seemed to make more sense on the early morning return home. So why Johnnie Fox's? Why that festival?
Do you reckon it links into what we were talking about at the start?
That's what I said,
differently that night.
Yeah, was there something more? Did she... of one of the few things that Connell did speak the truth about, was it true that he did actually date her a couple of times and that they were more personally known?
Well, one thing I would say is when he told the woman, Mary Creedon, he'd have no fear of lying to her.
Yeah.
That's one thing. He's probably not a truthful person. That's the flip side of what I'm saying. But he wouldn't lie to her. He'd have no fear of it,
because he was in control of her, so it's not necessary to... Yeah.
It's such a strange conversation to have with your then girlfriend anyway, right?
Yeah.
If your ex walked into a pub, you're kind of be looking the other way.
And going, oh shit, I hope she doesn't recognise me or come up to me. Yeah, not the other way around, offering, here, stand there, love, I just want to go over and talk to an ex-girlfriend over there.
Yeah, so you'd wonder, it's a very good point to know, who in the group suggested to go to Johnnie Fox?
And I genuinely don't have an answer to that. I don't know.
And would it have been a big thing? I wonder, everybody would have known around the area that there was a festival in Johnnie Fox's, but 1,000 people, it's not that big for a festival.
No, sure. Johnnie Fox's would have, on a busy July evening around festival time, gig time, would have 300 or 400 people in it anyway. This was obviously an outside thing as well, so it was somewhat expanded with using the beer tents. But it might sound to people to be more, but I don't think it was. So why did this specific festival come up in such an awkward place to get to? Why and then the reference by another friend that I think she might have went to the festival last year, the previous year before. So was there something in her mind and a connection a lot deeper with Connell than we necessarily know about? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
It'd be interesting to know when he stopped working in the roller disco place, the Top Hat. I suppose that would be...
Probably when he got sacked.
Well, probably like found out who he was,
Yeah, like most other jobs.
Yeah, exactly. He has some amount of jobs and relationships. He died at 46,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then probably loads of stuff that they don't know about. It's good to see that they're actually still looking into his background.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and what other connections there could be there. I suppose the real tragedy of this case is that it would take more than 8 years for a trial and conviction, and no matter how simple or complex the case appears, any missteps by police can lead to delays and ultimately appeals, with never a definite resolution for the family of a victim. On a positive, if there is one, new laws and regulations will be enacted to prevent the technical missteps of the Gardaí in the case when it comes to the arrest of a suspect and their detention and questioning. When it comes to Vincent Connell, there's no shortage of victims, as I've just laid out. I've barely touched upon his other crimes and the potential that Patricia Furlong is not the only victim of his actions, no longer with us now. This is a case where the timeline itself provides its own conclusions and analysis. Ciaran, final thoughts before we finish up?
Well, I suppose it's a bit of a dark thought, but it's actually a good thing that he died at 46, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would have done a lot more damage to people. Like, God knows where he would have went to them.
Yeah. And we don't know what was at that stage, because he once the heat rose for him, he ran. He always ran from, when the heat rose and the attention focused on him. That was his out. Back to the UK, and it's a pattern we've seen in quite a number of other cases that we've covered, where people flee either to the States or they flee to the UK when attention starts focusing on them within a serious crime.
Because I think he asked Mary Creedon literally the next day to go to
literally, she was totally taken aback, and then I suppose in hindsight she realised he just made up this excuse of, I have contacts over there, he'll get me a job. Now, in fairness, maybe he did have contacts, but clearly he was more motivated by getting away from the heat in Ireland over there than he was chasing after jobs.
He must have had access to money of some description, did he? I don't know, maybe not, but he seemed to be quite mobile. Yeah,
his movements, his background would seem to suggest he was certainly not a man who was poverty stricken in any way.
So we just have to wait. I hope you would hope that there'd be more news to come out about him. Well, not hope, but you would expect, right, over the years with DNA databases and these type of things.
Getting better and better all the time. Yeah.
Come out, Grim fella.
Yeah. Okay. That
was good stuff, Mick, again with the timeline.
Yeah, that's essentially our case, a tragic case. And
you might come back to Connell on one of your updates or something. Yeah,
you never know what quite develops and comes out in these cases, and where sudden links start arising that nobody had thought of before. But I'm certainly convinced that a man of Connell's mentality, background, brutality, and the litany of crimes and victims he left behind, that there are not an awful lot more victims there. Whether they are deceased or not, I don't know. I don't know if it ever rose to the level of Patricia Furlong with somebody else, but it wouldn't at all surprise me if he's connected with at least one or two other cases of death.
Yeah, or it wouldn't surprise me if he had a assumed identity or something. He seems that type of person.
A chameleon. Yeah. Okay, that's it from us. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Radio Espial. As always, God bless and take care. And we'll see you probably in another couple of weeks for another timeline. Okay, thanks. See you soon.